So we can just start anytime you want.
Yeah, no, we're starting. We just started. I just hit the record.
Okay, great.
So Jim Dow, hello,
It's
welcome. You are in the Boston area, or you are in Boston itself? How would you
no, just
distinguish?
outside in
Yeah,
the suburbs, in a
right.
suburb that was voted a number of years ago as the most boring town in Massachusetts. Um,
The
and
state of Massachusetts voted
yeah,
accordingly.
well, the Boston Globe,
Oh, I see.
which is essentially the state of Massachusetts, and it's great because nobody pays any attention to anybody else. Uh, we're lucky we have a couple of wonderful neighbors, including I don't know if you know the writer Tom Perrotta. Uh,
That yeah, that name
yeah,
was
yeah.
he one of the investigators into the big break around the
Oh no,
priest
no, that
abuse?
no, no,
Okay.
that's another person. No, he wrote The Leftovers and a number
Oh,
of other
okay.
stuff. So we've got neighbors that we're friends with, but it's a great place to live, and Boston's a great place to travel from because you can get to the airport quickly, you can get out of town quickly. It's really good for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was going to be one of my questions because you've been in the Boston area for how much? What percentage of your life would you say?
Well, I was brought home from the hospital to this house,
Okay.
and I've left it on photo trips, and I've left it
Uh-huh.
briefly to be an undergraduate student at RISD, but I scuttled back. I'm an only child. I live in a neighborhood with people who make, thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we, as Jackie and I say, keep the property taxes low. We hang out our laundry.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think that the part of the reason for asking you about Boston is I was thinking about it just a little while ago,
Hmm.
how many guests I've had in the past from the Boston area, and I think I could come up with a couple. I don't think there are any more than that
Oh, really?
prior guests,
Hmm.
and so that just frames the question around the art community of the Boston area. Um, I mean, do you think that Boston is comparable to a place like San Francisco as far as size and cost of living, or are there maybe better analogs?
No, I
And
think that's a good
yeah,
analog.
yeah, okay. And
Um,
and what is? Just give me a sketch of the art community such as it is, and you've known it over the years.
sure. Well, the art community sort of divides itself into people who are here to study and working in the academic world, of which there's a lot. There's a lot of colleges and universities here, I'm sure, as you know. Most of them have one form or another of fine art program. There's maybe four major art schools here, three major art schools, plus RISD, which is very close. And so there's a whole community that's lined up in that.
Yeah.
And then there are people who collect, and of course, a lot of the people who collect go to New York. Um, which is the moan and the groan of gallerists here. Um, but I think there's an active art community. It's also because of the connection with academia. There's a kind of how shall I say it? In some ways, sort of an over seriousness to it. There's not kind of the uh, whoopee sense that you would get in New York or Los Angeles or probably San Francisco too. But it's a great place to be because there's at least one of everything. There are not 42 restaurants that serve the same kind of food, but there's two or three really good art stores. There's a good photography store. You can survive here quite well. A lot
Hmm.
of people leave because it's as expensive as San Francisco,
Yeah.
and it's cold.
Yeah.
Right now there's I don't know 2.5 feet of snow on the ground, which is unusual these days. But
Right.
we have winter,
Right.
which
Yeah.
doesn't bother me. I grew up with it, and I'm fine with it. And but some
Sure.
people it makes crazy. But I
Sure.
do think I do think you form friendships here that last a long time, because people tend to either be tenured or have some kind of secure job. So I have a small group of very close friends that I have here, some of whom are in the arts, some of whom aren't. Um, I didn't know anybody who wasn't in the arts until we had kids, and then daycare came along, and that opened up a world to me. I know people who do financial advising.
Right.
and their
Yeah.
friends.
Right. Isn't
And
that
that's
the biggest institution, the biggest business in Boston proper is
yeah,
finance?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
finance and education.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of the curses that Boston has, which is unusual, and people outside here don't know about it, is that there's a huge amount of tax-free land here because it's owned by the Catholic Church and academic institutions.
Mm.
And so the tax, Metro Boston's about 700,000, but excuse me, Boston proper is about 700,000, but Metro Boston's about 5 million.
Hmm.
So you compare it to LA, where obviously the population is much bigger, but there are a whole lot more portions of LA that are paying taxes to LA than
Yeah.
are paying taxes here to Boston. So Boston's always boning.
So, in other words, is Boston or Massachusetts taxes comparable to California or even higher? Property
Their
taxes, that is.
property taxes are comparable. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Got it.
We were house rich when the kids were in school because they were going to public school. The two kids were going to public school. Now we're back to house poor again. You could sell a house and live happily ever after. I don't know where, but we just love living here. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
that's great. That's
We'll
great.
see.
Other than your great neighbors, what are the benefits that make you stay?
Well, I'm a devoted masshole, as we're called.
Okay.
I love it here because I love the edge to it. I love the fact that people question you about everything. Nobody is. People here are very friendly and very helpful, but there's an edge to them, and you got to break that edge. So, for instance, right now I'm working photographing in a neighborhood called Nonantum, which is an old Italian Irish neighborhood that's being gentrified, but it's still got the edge to it. And so, for example, I was photographing the other day. I had my camera set up. It's a big view camera, so I'm not moving around. I was photographing this park where they decorate it for the holidays, and I was photographing one of the decorations in the park. And this truck pulls up and drives across, parks diagonally into the sidewalk, blocking the traffic in the other way. This guy gets out in a suit and a hat. It's like a pinstripe double-breasted suit on a snowy day, and says, "What you doing?" And I explained. He said, "Oh yeah, I designed that park. Good job. Yeah, my father, Big Joey, he had to play." It just that's what happens here.
Wow,
And
that's
if you're
crazy.
not, and if you're not bothered by that, which I love it, I embrace it. It just there's no smooth surfaces here.
Okay.
Is
Well,
the best way to put it.
you brought up an interesting image, which is the photographer with the large view camera, right? So, do you have one of the curtains or whatever the
Yeah,
drapes that you put over? Okay.
yeah,
So where I'm going with this is when you are photographing your work or photographing things
yeah,
that will
yeah,
become your work, you are almost as much the subject as the person making subjects, right? Because you are so visible, right? what is
you're
that
absolutely right.
what has that been like over the course of your career, as far as, I don't know, figuring out an ideal dynamic with random passersby who interrupt your work and what have you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's just say the arc of my career. It used to be that people thought if I was down south, we're talking the 60s and 70s, early 70s, if I was down south, that I was a civil rights worker. If I was up north, that I was a surveyor and the property was going to be knocked down. And now I'm just an old guy with this wooden camera, and everybody stops to talk. And some of the conversations are even too blue for this podcast, uh, but they're just wonderful. So again, I embrace that. I may have to say, okay, excuse me, just give me 30 seconds here, because because my exposures are sometimes anywhere from a second to 20 minutes. So give me a little time here and we'll talk. And so while there are very, very few, if any, people in my photographs, the fact is that there are people all around you. I'll send you a wonderful little 40-second clip of me photographing in Uruguay, where this guy, I was photographing this guy's hot dog stand, and we asked him to step out, and he stepped out. Well, it turns out he was a tango singer, and so the entire photograph was accompanied by him singing tango in the most beautiful,
Hmm.
deep, whiskey cured voice. So, yeah, that stuff happens all the time.
It sounds like the bottom line is you basically kind of you embrace it, but when you need to get work done, you have to tell people like, "Give me a minute."
Yeah, and I always feel bad about that because generally speaking, people stop with interesting things. They'll say, "Oh, big camera," or used to be, "How much is that camera?" Well, now it's like a wooden artifact. You couldn't. Yeah, it's fifteen
Is it
hundred dollars.
priceless at this point, or are there replicas of what you have?
Oh, no, no, you can find them because
Okay.
people buy them. People buy them, think they're going to use them, and then they sell them. And so there's still plenty of them floating around. But
Yeah.
uh, if I were to walk in with the comparable digital equipment, I'd be lugging $35 to $40,000. It wouldn't be big, but it would be a $35 to $40,000 thing. It might be tethered to a computer. I'd stand out like a sore thumb, and somebody would hit me over the head and take it.
Has all of your black and white or your entire catalog of photography been analog, or has any of it been digital?
Well, the funny thing is that in teaching, I converted to digital probably about 2007, and I've become very, very proficient at using a small digital camera to basically document exhibitions and stuff in New York. And so I would make these post production Photoshop representations of shows that look better than the show. People would go to the show and say, "Oh, that didn't look so good." I said, "Well, you got to look at the little squares in the corner." And, the little squares in the corner when you saw them in class were, 6 feet by 6 feet. No, no, no. So, I think that whole aspect of working is really, really interesting. But for me, using the camera, working in the way that I do, interacting with the people that I do, I always ask permission. And sometimes I come back, they'll say, "Oh, come back Tuesday." Well, I'm there Tuesday.
What
Um,
if you're shooting a lot of the work that have seen of yours are very vintage, very signs, advertising signs with a lot of character and originality.
yeah,
If it's a restaurant or a motel, do you ask for permission for
yeah,
those?
yeah. Oh,
So
yeah, because again, I'm going to be sitting there. So
right,
for
right.
example, I was in Birmingham, Alabama this summer, and there's this wonderful, wonderful barbecue joint that has this fabulous sign, and it's very, very popular. It's called Bob Sykes. It's right on, actually, it's on the old highway I'm photographing on. And so I knew I was going to sort of be in the way because it's dusk, right? So,
Yeah.
so I go in and I ask, and 90% of the time people will just say yes. Occasionally I say, "Well, could you come back Tuesday because we're not busy?" Or, and of course I'll do that because I'm in people's space.
Do they
And
ask you for the final results ever?
oh yeah, I, I,
Yeah.
I, I bring them back. I send them pictures, and I also say, I'm happy to send you files if you want to use them for whatever, and because that I think that's a fair part of the exchange.
On a technical level,
Hmm.
regarding analog digital, and you've made it clear that you've done it to document your work, document your shows. Thinking about the signs in particular, but we could take it to other examples. But I want to
Sure,
focus on the signs
sure,
because that's just something that's most easily in my mind.
yeah.
Is it possible even to get what you have gotten with digital? It doesn't seem like it is.
Well, I can give you no photographer can answer that question subjectively,
Right,
objectively,
right,
right?
right,
We're all wed to the things that we do.
right.
Um, you can approximate it in sharpness, probably even do better than it, analog in sharpness. You can approximate it in color saturation, all those things, but you can't, it simply won't look the same, which is not to say that one is good and one is bad. It would be the different, it would be the difference between somebody who says paints in muted colors and works between whites and grays and greens, let's say, to somebody who works with reds and blues and has trees in the middle. There's just a difference. And
Yeah.
you can see that, you can pretty much see that difference right away. I have friends who use, $100,000 camera setups. Their stuff looks great, but it's not the look I want.
Are they all digital? The ones,
Uh,
the $100,000
yeah,
ones?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Are they
Because you're,
digital large format?
yeah, because you're paying somewhere between 15 and $60,000 for the camera itself, for basically for the computer,
Yeah.
and then you're paying between three cheap. That's cheap. $3,000 to $25,000 each lens you use. So,
Hmm.
and the bastards change the operating systems all the time, so you've got to constantly re-up. And my film,
Do- uh,
just to give you an example,
yeah.
I just bought a box of film because I'm going to New Orleans next week. Uh,
What kind of film did you buy?
so about 8x10 color negative film, Kodak, or whoever's wearing the Kodak
Right.
shirt these
Right.
days. It's a great film. It's after tax, it's $307 for 10 sheets. So that means each picture is $37. Well, I take two, so now we're up to what, 72 dollars, something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm. Hmm.
$72. Then it's $15 to process each sheet, so that's 30. So it's $100 a picture.
Right. Right.
So I think about it, but I just feel that I'm tempting the gods if I just do one. So
Totally.
whenever I can, I do
We could definitely go down that rabbit hole, but I'm going to actually back up to,
two. Fine, that's
yeah,
fine.
but we're staying close because I want to go
Okay.
back to the analog
Yeah.
again, because what you brought to mind just describing the, objective, your attempt at an objective take on it, is the fact that at least a couple of big films recently have been shot on film. And I think it's because they have that visual je ne sais quoi, right? I mean, maybe
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be even je ne sais quoi, it can actually be articulated. But that sort of fullness, richness, graininess, etc., right? That
Mm-hmm.
you can, as you well described, you can say it's six half dozen. It really depends on your taste.
Mm-hmm.
But as we're sitting here talking about it now, and I'm describing it that way, and I'm thinking about these sign photographs that you've done, is just like I can't see how you would make a better picture digitally.
Can I throw a curveball?
Throw a curveball.
Okay. So there's a particular scanner that I just got access to that's extraordinary. It's no longer made, but costs about $50 a scan to do it.
It's a
So
German manufacturer by any chance?
it's called a Creo. I don't know where it's made. It's no
Okay.
longer made.
Okay.
But these friends of mine that I work with got a hold of one, and so now whenever I sell a picture, I will take my negative and have it rescanned. I've got scans of all my pictures, and some of them are very, very good, but I'll have it rescanned. And this very interesting thing happened just last month. A friend of mine in New Orleans, who I had promised to give some pictures to. I'm sorry, this bloody thing is ringing. Are you getting the ringing at
I'm
your
not
end?
hearing it. Yeah, so you
Okay,
can wait
great.
till it stops. You can hang up. You
Great.
can
No, no,
start
no, it
again.
doesn't bother me. Okay.
Okay.
So this friend of mine wanted four pictures. They're all signs. They're all from that black and white late 60s, early 70s work. I said, okay, here's the deal. I will charge you the amount of money that it takes to print them, which is about $250 a picture. So that's $1,000. This guy's a lawyer. $1,000. I said, and I'm going to rescan them. He said, fine, fine, fine. So that ended up costing another $200. Okay. I get the prints. Now, you know, when you print big editions, often you print on a roll, and when you go to preview them, uh, they're still on the roll, so they're spread out on a table, almost like a huge piece of movie film with a picture, a picture, a picture, a picture. So here are these four pictures of four different signs on four different surfaces.
Hmm.
Like one was a wooden surface, a weathered wooden surface. One was enamel on metal. One, et cetera, et cetera. Four distinctly different surfaces. I start looking at the prints, and oh shit, there's something wrong here. I see this pattern. I see this, but it's different in each picture. And my friend looked at me. That's the actual surfaces. You're seeing the difference in the surfaces. You can't get that. It's a piece of film, but you cannot get that out of a piece of film with an analog process. You have to scan it because the scanner sees more than the photographic paper does.
Right.
And that's, we are, in that sense, we're living in the good old days. I can take a picture of, like there's a picture I just took of a bakery at dusk. Okay. It's bright inside the bakery, relatively. It's dark outside, relatively. And the sun has gone down, but there's still color in the sky. All those things are in the negative. And I can get them and put them on one piece of paper. If I had taken that same picture analog, I would never get the bakery, the inside of the bakery, and the sunset, and the shadow on the wall. That, you know, I sit down. I just was working on some pictures before we started talking. The pictures I'm working on are from the 1970s. I'd never scanned them. I scanned them, and I'm looking. Oh my God, there's stuff in that I never saw. So
Okay, that's good to know.
you just got to. The issue is you just got to stand still. You know, metaphorically, to do all this kind of stuff.
You made me wonder if you have any advice for artists of any kind
Mm-hmm.
who have to go through the labor of editing their own documentation. Like, let's just say whether or not they're using a pro documenter for the of their work, in between those documentations, they're going to do their own documentation. They're going to go into whatever software, Lightroom or what
Mm-hmm.
have you, Bridge,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to sit there and edit. And I do that, and
Yeah.
I kind of fucking hate it. So I'm wondering if you have a hack or a workaround so that it's not such a pain in the ass.
First of all, I take my phone everywhere I go, and I take a picture with the phone. And I would say 85 to 90% of the time, the phone gives you a really good sense of color. Um, whether I'm in a gallery or out in the street or a sculpture in the park or the bakery that I just photographed. So that's my sketch. And whenever I start to go to the next step, whatever the next step might be, I work from that sketch. So, for example, when I would go and photograph, because when I was photographing these shows, they're all contemporary art shows in New York and London and places. They were not my work, they were other people's work. So I would take a phone picture that would be relatively neutral. And then I'd have sometimes 40 files, 50 files from the show. I would then match them to that and work backwards and start exaggerating.
Hmm.
And then it became fun. And then it became like a game. Like, oh, really, it would be like working on a painting, adding, adding, adding. Of course, you're not technically adding, but, you are adding.
What are you adding? What are some of the main tools that we're talking about? Digital tools.
Making masks and changing saturation and changing color balance and
Right.
changing angles. Not so much angles of light, but intensity of light.
And you're looking back at your sketch and you're going, how, this is my reference, but I'm going to make it a much better version of this sketch.
Yeah, and when I was like the pictures I'm just working on just now are this family from South Louisiana that are sort of my adopted family. And in 1978, I took a picture of the four basic clusters of the family. And now I'm going down uh, to New Orleans, and I'm taking the prints. I'm finally going to bring them prints. Okay, the family is standing generally in front of their house or in front of trees or whatever. And as I look at I never made there were no phones, and I never made a slide or anything. So I don't have any idea. And suddenly I'm able to take the cluster of people in front of the house or in the space that they're living in and pull them out, make them a slightly different color balance
Mm.
than the background, so that
Hmm.
even though the viewer is going to think, oh, they're standing in front of their house on a sunny day, or they're standing in front of their house at night or whatever, they're actually two separate realities. Well, in the pictures that I really work on, for my own work, there may be 6 or 7 separate realities within the picture in terms of the saturation, the lighting, et cetera, et cetera. That's a freedom. And I'm not talking about adding external stuff. I'm talking about just working with the stuff that's in the file, was in the negative, so to speak,
Hmm.
and using it in the same way that a painter would dip and
Hmm.
dive and move. And to
Hmm.
me, you know, coming towards the end of my life and never having had that freedom, it's whoa, every day's fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's segue from there to your teaching, actually, since you almost brought it up. You've had a 50-plus year career teaching. How many
40,
years?
40, 45, 46. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So my question is, to start anyway, how much, if any, of those 46-ish years were teaching the things you just described versus crits, etc.? What's the
I
breakdown? Yeah.
I labored very hard to make it as much as I possibly could. And of course, when you're starting out, you take the, the classes you're assigned, and many of them were crit classes or beginning classes or whatever. But I found as I got older, and particularly when I moved out of teaching in the studio and was teaching academic classes, where they were not the standard academic class because I was in this wonderful, crazy school, the museum school. But I was able to use the kind of, how shall I say it, inventiveness that all these things apply in order to make my teaching better. So, for example, as I said, when I would go and document those shows
Hmm.
and actually think about, okay, here's this particular artist, how am I going to make them really, really look good on the screen?
Hmm.
As a Because they're no longer in the gallery, they're on a screen. And I would bring those skills, which I was in the midst of learning, so that was interesting too, use those skills to make that work look even better. And that was just fantastic. And then having to talk about it, right? Because you can't just show the stuff and go, and you've got to talk about it. And especially if you're trying to inspire people to talk back. So all that was increasingly, as time went on, became more and more, for lack of a better word, creative,
Mm.
and less worrying about the syllabus and worrying about, the what do they call it? Quantifiables, deliverables. That's what
Mm.
they talk
Hmm.
about.
Hmm.
Do you
Right.
do academic stuff? Do you teach?
I don't teach.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
there is as much corporate speak
Right.
in in the academic world as there is, and deliverables. The old Hermann Goering, when I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun. When I hear the word deliverables and the other word that I shall not speak in your honor,
Thank you.
when I hear that word, I reach for my gun.
Right. Um, did you got tenure at a certain point, correct or no?
We had rolling contracts,
Oh, okay. So in
so
other words, the reason for the question obviously is, if you don't deliver the deliverables, you're vulnerable
yeah,
potentially to
yeah,
revision.
yeah. Well, you're vulnerable. Where you're not vulnerable is if your classes are big and you're in a school that is underfunded. Um,
Hmm.
so I actually I've also taught some of those same classes at Harvard and at Princeton, and was greeted very warmly, but I was a temporary visitor, and so I wasn't ruffling anybody's feathers.
Hmm. It's inevitable for people to wonder what the difference, if there is one, between the experiences you had teaching in the Ivy League versus at the museum school or elsewhere that you've taught. Is there a notable difference, would you say, or no?
Okay, this is a good anecdote.
Okay,
So
good.
one of the things are you familiar with the mechanics of the old National Endowment for the Arts grant awarding process?
Probably, probably not into the mechanics of. I'm like a lot of people familiar with the whole government, shutdown of the or attempt to shut
Yeah.
down the NEA. But
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So and I was involved in it a number of times, so I knew it well. And one of the things that they did in pure genius was the selection committee that would be voting on grants, say grant in photography for the year 1984 or whatever.
Hmm.
They would get together a panel that was always an odd number and always had an idiot savant and always had a professional quote educator and a professional they had this thing curated and balanced, and they wouldn't tell you anything about the work, and you would just see, I think it was at one point it was 20 images, and then you'd vote yes or no. You'd go through round after round after round. When you got to the final, I think it was the semifinals or quarterfinals, essentially, they would give you statements and all this kind of stuff. So there was this kind of you had to go with your gut. So I set up. I would end the semester. That would be the final exam. We would look at 50 artists and choose, and then when we got down to say 10, we would have a discussion of why are those 10 and what happened to the other 30 and da 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 da. And all these fascinating things came out. So one year I did it at Harvard, and it was a particularly small class, so we could do it really quickly in one afternoon. And so I I set up the talk by saying, you're going to look at this stuff, and you're going to have to judge it just without information. Well, they all froze because you have to have information. No, you're not going to have information. And we went through a couple of rounds, and then before we get to the final round, I said, I think I ought to tell you something, that this is the way a lot of decisions are made. Decisions about triage medically,
Mm,
decisions about investment,
mm.
decisions about who to hire for whatever, maybe even to go to the moon. I said, and you guys are probably the most evaluated group of people in the history of the world. Your class, not the class at Harvard, but your class of people are looked at from the time you're two and applying to private school. And so this has happened to you scores of times and you don't even know it. But you need to be aware of it because you need to understand how best, regardless of what the category is or what the parameters are, how best to present yourself, essentially sight unseen
Mm.
in that thing. And as I think I said to you when we were talking earlier, you know, I would always tell the students, if you stick in this, whatever this is, you're going to be a freelance producer of intellectual property, and that's your role in the world.
Hmm.
And you need to be aware of it, and you need to embrace it, or challenge it, or walk away from it. But that's the way you're going to be judged, regardless of what sort of content you're creating.
But the
And also,
others, yeah.
yeah.
Finish your thought.
Oh, the thought, finishing the thought, and the important thing is you need to protect that, not protect it in a legal way or anything like that, but protect that thing that you have inside you that you love and believe in from suffering from the kind of practicalities that can lead to cynicism.
Hmm. Wow, that's a lot to take in, to give and to take in
Well, we
for a
did have a
student.
semester.
Fair enough. Um, but I couldn't help wondering whether the takeaway, it may be a little too easy, but
Hmm.
when the students, a small class as you said it was, but when these students at Harvard were like, no, we need, why can't we have the stuff, right? Why can't we have the statement or whatever? If that's a question of high analytical skills but low intuitive skills, and or if it's more just of a type A type of thing, you know.
I think it's more than anything, it's the system they're in. Um, I had wonderful students at Harvard, and I so enjoyed them. One of the great stories for me is there was this young woman who she was an econ major, but her boyfriend was a very good photographer and went to a good art school in Columbus, Ohio, which is where she was from. So she was very aware of photography, and she decided to write her thesis on why what makes photographs valuable. What are the criteria if you use standard economic, scarcity,
Yeah.
desire, blah 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 blah, all these things. So of course she comes to me and she said, "Would you be, would you be?" She was taking my photo history class, and I said, "Sure, I'd love to." So I took her to New York, and I took her to a couple of galleries, and she interviewed the gallerists for that perspective. And we're driving back, and it's like a 4-hour drive, so we're driving along, and she says, "Jim, I got to tell you something." And I thought, "Oh God, I don't want to hear it. It's going to be some." She said, "She said, I'm I'm a senior at Harvard. I'm going to graduate, you know, magna or summa cum laude. I'm, blah 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 blah. I've got all these things. I've taken all these courses with all these professors, and you're the first professor that ever asked me what I thought." I said, "Well, what happens?" And she said, "They ask you what you think about what they think." And I said, "That's discouraging." And she didn't say it in a pejorative way. She just said that's the circumstances. You get these people who are world class researchers, and they're just so deeply buried in their whatever it is that they just presume A, you're going to be interested in it, and B, um, that they're the most interesting person in the room.
Hmm.
So I think there's a certain amount of that in a lot of, I've observed in a lot of institutions. And so students, so you set up this thing where it's this, where the ethos of the museum school was this, you know.
Hmm.
When I first taught at Harvard, which was a whole separate thing, that was teaching a studio photo class. This wonderful student, um, like the third day of class, he's standing there and I'm demonstrating something in the darkroom. And he said, "Jim," because I always told, "Call me Jim, don't call me Professor." "Jim, let me ask you something." And I said, "What is it, Paul?" He said, "Well, the only difference between you and me is I'm doing photography and you're doing photography, and you spent more time than doing photography, so you can kind of tell me about stuff, right?" I said, "Yeah, that sums it up. It's no more glamorous than that.
Hmm.
And presumably you're both interested in the stuff."
This student of yours, the one at Harvard who did that thesis, did you learn something from that thesis?
Oh yeah.
I would imagine. What what
What
are,
I
what were some takeaways you remember?
Well, here's the thing, because it dovetails with a dear friend of mine who passed away a couple of years ago, who was a consultant but came with a background in, oh God, was it sociology?
Mm.
And he wrote this thing. It was a pyramid of the way that desire, the functions that create uh, the need for somebody to buy something or have something or do something. And it was this beautiful pyramid. I can send it to you if, if,
Yeah.
if you're interested. Beautiful pyramid. I looked at it, and I looked at the graphic of it, and we were good friends. We had dinner together all the time and stuff, and our partners were all close friends. And I said, "This looks exactly like the art world." exactly. As somebody said to me when I was trying to get some money for a book, well, we'd consider doing a book with you if you were dead. So there's that. There's
Yeah.
rarity.
Yeah.
There's scarcity. There's
Right.
all these things that we like to think are in the from the corporate world or from the capitalistic world, but they're really from the human world of desire and need and all that kind of stuff. And so, what was interesting when I was talking to this other student, this was before I'd met this friend. This was probably in the very early 2000s, and she anticipated all of that. She didn't have a beautiful chart,
Right.
but she would tell me, well, it's known that there's only one of these. It's well known that there's only one of these, or it's well known that there's only four of these, or it's well known that this guy went blind the year after he made this picture, or all these things that are, of course, create scarcity, create desire, create. So yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot from so many of my students.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, where we have to talk about next, which is the fact that one of the big takeaways I had from talking to you before was your line that in 50, not quite 50 years of teaching, the last 10 have been the most inspiring and interesting,
Yes.
as opposed to when you were starting and you were only about 10 years older than the students. And then it was like, I think that's what it was.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
the
yeah.
most recent years, you were 50 years older than the
This
students.
gap, this gap,
Right.
hey, this gap is not going to go away.
Right. Yeah.
You can teach an evening school and you can teach an extension school, but it's still not going to go away. It might be
But
smaller.
but generally the age range of the students that you have worked with over the decades has been between, I would imagine, like 18 and 22, somewhere in that range.
No, it's actually been much broader because the museum school where I did most of the teaching had very, very active students from older students who came back to go to art school after having done something else in their life. We had a program called Mass Rehab. We had people who'd gotten out of incarceration to go to art school, which was brilliant. We had people. There was this wonderful woman, Patty Acciardi, who had. You could go to Mass Rehab and you could apply and you could say, I want to do something, but I'm prevented doing it from my circumstances. I want to have a new career or whatever. And they would pay the money for you. So she wanted to go to art school. She had been a cabin attendant, flight attendant on Allegheny Airlines, which at that time was the most dangerous airline.
What did
And
it serve, Allegheny Airlines?
Pittsburgh, which is a terrible airport to land. Was a terrible airport. That area, the Alleghenies. And she said, the worst thing about the job is you show up to work, you're all freshened up and everything. You're bright as a pod, and the captain comes in and he's drunk, and you can't report him. Well, hopefully the co-pilot, no, he's drunk too. So the navigator flies the plane, and you couldn't report anybody.
Hmm.
So it eventually just kind of destroyed her. So she was able to convince, and I don't know what she's doing now, but she went to school and finished.
Hmm.
We had a guy who did the first time he didn't rat on his brother. They hauled him in front of a grand jury and he wouldn't sing. So he did 2 or 3 years in hard time. And he said he came out, he knew everything. He said, I never killed anybody. I never hurt anybody. But he said, I did everything else. And then he went in for, I think, 10 years or something. And then he got out and he came to the museum school, and he's the most wonderful guy. He was trained as a roofer, but he wanted to start a roofing company, but he couldn't borrow money. He couldn't get a loan from a bank. He had to do everything cash under the table, excuse me. And
Right.
and just he would come to class and give these perspectives on the world that the kids, it was priceless. And the kids would listen to him.
Mm.
They would go, "Oh yeah, really? Wow." Um, so and
Yeah.
there've been endless examples.
Well, as you're describing these students that you've had and
Hmm.
what you told me before about,
Yeah.
you know, the teaching over time. Well, before we get deeper into that, what you just said made me wonder whether, in general, I mean, maybe it's very case by case, the students were learning how to think. You know, that's one way that people describe
Yeah.
going to art school or taking
Yeah.
art. You know, you're not gonna. It's not a trade. You're not gonna do this and then you're gonna go and you're gonna make paintings. You're gonna make silk screens. You're gonna make photographs.
Right.
You're gonna
Right.
make sculptures and you're gonna sell them on the market. You know, it's much more abstract, right? That you're
Hmm.
learning how to think. You're learning how to be critical, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Is that what is the general, because it almost made you almost made it sound like with that woman who was the flight attendant that she was going to, you know, take photography and then she was going to become a photographer, and that seems a
Probably
bit
not.
misleading. Yeah.
Probably not. And
Yeah.
I would say used to be. I don't know if it's true anymore, but the odds of becoming a monetarily successful artist
Right.
are worse than becoming a major league baseball player.
I
By that,
don't
by
know if they're
that,
that bad, but
well,
yeah.
no, but by that, uh, like the Dodgers, for instance, I don't know, they have 26 people or 28 people on their regular roster, but there's probably another 30 or 40 who have what's called a major league contract. And so you take those maybe 100 people, you multiply it by 32, so that's 3,200 teams, some 3,200 people. You'd be hard put to find more than that who are financially comfortable without having some kind of backup.